This happened when I was around 17. At the time, Esme and I were the closest of friends. So close, in fact, that she lived in my family home for a few years when we were teenagers. She and I were as thick as thieves, sharing many interests and hobbies, but our most discussed topic by far was ghosts. We would binge watch scary stories on YouTube and make day treks to visit abandoned or otherwise terrifying places. All harmless fun that typically would lead to nothing serious, and truthfully, no notable experiences ever arose from those adventures. Then came the day something memorable would actually happen. My parents had decided to stay in Sydney for a few nights. I remember it well because when I relayed this information to Esme, her eyes began to glisten with an intense determination. "Awesome! This will be fun," she declared. I wasn't really sure why, as we had been home alone many times before, and those times weren't remotely exciting, but I would soon learn what had Esme so eager. Even now, I can still feel her gaze fixed on me as she sternly announced that it would be the perfect time to play with the Ouija board. It was fairly obvious that I would be intrigued by the proposal, as I have always been fascinated by the dark, unknown, and yet to be understood dynamics of the world. So naturally, I agreed to play with her. We didn't own a real Ouija board, so she Googled an image of one, and I, being the more artistic of us, started to jot down a replica of what I saw. It had all the bells and whistles. The lettering was done in cursive, with the yes and no symbols located appropriately in the corners. Sun and moon icons were added beneath the words for decoration, and it was bordered with beautiful line work. In hindsight, it was quite intricate for something handmade by two teenage girls. So about an hour of arts and crafts, we had ourselves a usable Ouija board. At this point, I was following Esme's directions blindly, as I hadn't actually bothered to learn much about Ouija boards. I just knew what I saw in movies, which I figured was not super reliable. Esme sent me to our supply cabinet to gather up some candles while she hunted down an oversized shot glass which would serve as a planchette. We made our final bathroom trips and placed our creation onto the bedroom floor. I took a photo to commemorate the occasion, and it was at this stage that I began to grow concerned. Internally, I had started to question whether this was a bad idea. I no longer felt adrenaline or anticipation, and the butterflies I had previously felt begun to swirl into a stomach ache. But we played. It was a few minutes of us spouting stuff to an empty room. Esme would ask questions along the lines of, "Is someone here?" and "Does anyone want to talk to us?" Very remedial, basic nonsense. I followed suit with similar questions, taking turns with Esme in hopes of inspiring a reaction from the other side. However, nothing ever happened. As you can imagine, we packed up, very disappointed. We were convinced that communicating with spirits was pure fiction, at least through this method. We didn't dispose of the board. I mean, why would we? It hadn't produced any frightful results, so we just stuck it in a drawer, never to be seen again, and went on with our regular routines. The next day, Esme was asked to babysit for her sister, and with my parents still away, this would mean I would be left alone. I didn't mind though, as I had recently quit smoking and was getting a little moody with people. She set off that evening by bus, and I settled in for a long night of anime and gaming. All was well, and I was enjoying a Ghibli movie marathon when things started to feel wrong. It was around 10 p.m. and I got up to get a drink when I noticed how unusually cold it was. I'm from Australia, and we were smack in the center of summer without an AC. Outside, the temperature was like 40 degrees Celsius, even at night, and yet I couldn't stop shaking. I decided to grab a blanket while I was up, and just as I was about to close the cupboard, I heard a light thud come from my bedroom. It was so faint that it would have gone unnoticed if I hadn't paused the movie. My mind didn't initially turn to demons. Actually, it focused on my dog. I had an empty bottle of water beside the bed, and I assumed that she had knocked it over, getting up, as she sometimes would. However, upon entering my room, she was nowhere to be found, and the bottle stood untouched. I ducked into the spare room and even checked under my parents' bed, but she simply wasn't nearby. I found her sleeping on the lounge at the opposite end of our house, and it looked like she hadn't moved in a while. Now, feeling slightly creeped out and unable to sway my dog into joining me for a cuddle, I returned to my room. The second I set foot through the door, it hit me like thunder. I knew I was being watched. Don't ask me how. I just can't express what makes me so sure, but it was like gravity, undeniable. I hesitantly sat back on the bed and proceeded to watch my movie, hoping to distract myself from this sensation. But to my dismay, I felt as though whatever had its eyes locked on me was now hovering directly over me. I lay visibly upset for the remainder of the movie, telling myself I'm suffering some wacky withdrawals right now and that it will pass. But it didn't. It intensified. The movie ends and my eyes fall on the drawer in which we had shoved our makeshift Ouija board in. In almost synchronized time, a pair of scissors that I had hanging from a thumbtack on the wall plummets to the ground. I figured the tack had come loose, which had caused it to drop down, but upon examination, the tack was still wedged firmly in the wall. What I may be facing dawns on me. I turned to use my phone, but had left it in the kitchen like an idiot and proceeded to go out and retrieve it. My dog is awake at this point and trails me back up the corridor. However, she does not enter my room with me. Instead, she sits down, shoots a look right behind me, does a little whimper, and scrambles to my parents' room with her tail lowered. I have never been more unsettled in my 26 years of existence on this earth than I was at that one moment. So although it's about 12:30 a.m., I resort to messaging a friend for comfort who we will call Manny. He, being an insomniac, instantly responds, and I begin disclosing my delusions to him. I hope that he would rationalize the strange activity or simply tell me I'm being stupid and to get some sleep, but that's not what happened at all. After telling Manny about the Ouija board through text, he doesn't respond for a while. I assume he fell asleep as it's like 1:30 a.m. now, or perhaps he didn't know what to say and would respond later. He was the type to overthink things after all. About 10 minutes pass by and my phone begins to ring. It's Manny, and I answer with a chipper hello. He skips the how do you do's and asks me point blank to recount every detail of mine and Esme's Ouija game experience. I told him all that I could remember, and he listens in silence, giving me a few more than okays and alrights as I go. When I'm done, he gives me a cold sigh before continuing to explain the many mistakes we had made. The biggest though? Esme removed her hands a number of times from the planchette. She had no regard for the serious nature of the game and openly joked about the rules. She did bother to say goodbye though. However, Manny remained adamant that the odd occurrences I was experiencing were somehow tied to her actions and were probably a consequence of being disrespectful to the spirits. My jaw almost hit the floor when he said we might have left a portal to the realm of unholy things open, dead in the middle of my bedroom. Well, excellent. Now I'm just crapping myself, I believe is what I shouted at him through the phone. He wasn't at all surprised by my reaction and said I was welcome to come by his place until Esme or my parents returned. I loved this idea. However, neither of us had a license or a car for that matter, and it was quickly approaching 3 a.m. Now, I may have been foolish, but even then I was totally aware that hanging around a demon portal on the witching hour was probably asking for trouble. So lacking money for a taxi, I opted to walk the 4.9 kilometers to his place. I had made this journey many times before, so I knew it would be at least an hour walk, and Manny knew it too. That's probably why he offered to chat with me while I headed over. I sprung out the door without contemplating the level of battery my phone had. Looking back on it, I probably should have been more concerned with my safety. I was and still am a 40 kilo, 150 centimeters tall female after all, but I wasn't overly worried, as I was filled to the brim with fear, and the unbelief that I was being observed by someone unknown had consumed me. The walk between our houses isn't exactly a suburban stroll though. Actually, it's more rural than most places. Manny's town was the one over from mine, and to get there involved crossing a low-level bridge with no streetlights, then making your way down an unlit road for about 40 minutes across some farmland and through a bit of bush. There are a few houses sprinkled along the way, maybe 3 or so tops, but calling them houses is a generous description. Knowing all of this information did not deter me, however, and the only thought in my head was, yep, let's do this. It's better than being the prey of a poltergeist or some other malevolent creature. It's got to be. That, and I was seriously regretting my choice to quit smoking. The first 15 minutes of walking went by rather quickly. Manny was cheering me on over the phone and promising me a nice, disgusting, cancerous cigarette to calm my nerves when I arrived. I had almost rid myself of paranoia and had nearly made it across the bridge when I spotted something off in the distance. It appeared small and it was moving slowly. I tell Manny that I think someone's cat or dog is in the road while approaching it with caution. He doesn't respond. I take my phone away from my ear and glare down at its lifeless screen. "Oh, brilliant," I muttered to myself, stuffing it into my pocket and recentering my focus onto the figure. It was much closer now, and I was able to make out a distinct animal shape. The creature turned out to be a horribly mutilated fox. It had obviously been hit by a vehicle of some sort and hadn't died from the impact. I was unlucky enough to stumble across it. The poor critter was dragging itself across the pavement by its front legs. Its hind ones were flattened like paper. Strands of muscle, vein, and organs protruded from its stomach, and I could see masses of fleshy, blood-covered tissue spread all over the road. I love animals, so seeing this was enough to make me turn around and head home. I wanted to call the appropriate services to deal with the situation, and I didn't want to keep heading in that direction as I subconsciously feared that the fox had been attacked by something more vicious. Now I know what you're all are thinking. Roadkill is not an uncommon sight in a rural area, and yes, we tend to have a lot of wildlife wiped out by vehicle, but this was different. I hadn't seen any cars pass by. Not a single one. With little I could do without a phone, I marched home with a newfound sense of purpose and had completely forgotten why I was visiting Manny in the first place. That was until I reached my front door. As I put the key in the lock and reached for the handle, an overwhelming rush of panic surged through my bones. I halted mid-gesture and glanced through the window pane beside the front door. Although nothing was visible to the eye, the negative energy was heavy in the air, so much so that I chose not to go inside and instead curled up in a chair on the porch. I fell asleep and awoke to Esme, who had arrived home a few hours earlier and helped escort me to my bed. She was really confused and wanted to know why I decided to sleep outside. I told her of my night, the creepy sensation I experienced, and the mutilated fox I had seen. Then I ranted on about the game of Ouija we played and swore never to meddle with it again. What she said next left me mortified. We've never played Ouija? Shivers crawled down my spine as the words escaped her lips. I laughed nervously and said something like, he must be joking, right? But she just shook her head and stared at me like I was a lunatic. I shot up to check the drawer we had placed the board in, but it was gone. Esme tried to calm me and told me I probably had a super vivid nightmare or something. But as much as I wanted to believe her, I just didn't. I made that board with my own two hands and I could still feel the half-formed blister on my finger from drawing it. I could sense something was off, but I just smiled and replied a simple, "Yeah, probably." It wasn't until much later that I remembered the photo. I mentally prepared myself before checking my phone and thought to myself I was stupid for just obsessing this much over what was surely just a dream. But to my horror, there it was, a picture of our handmade Ouija board, dated 2 days prior, exactly as I remembered it. I was deeply disturbed, but decided not to share this discovery with Esme. I did, however, tell Manny, who distanced himself from her and encouraged me to do the same. I am no longer friends with Esme, and I never told her that I knew she was lying. I just avoided the conversation entirely. She continued living with my family for another year. During that time, I refused to partake in any more paranormal activities with her, despite her persistence. To this day, I am convinced that something malicious tried to attach itself to me, but was unsuccessful. I continued to feel stalked by an unknown entity during Esme's stay with me, and I recall her becoming increasingly reclusive. Eventually, she moved out, and I stopped feeling like I was being watched. We kept in touch for a while, but ultimately lost contact, and I buried this memory along with the friendship. I am 26 now, and I'm still not sure why she went to such a length to deceive me, but I know for certain it wasn't just a super vivid nightmare. I only played the Ouija board one time. I was 17 years old and at a friend's house with a bunch of other teenagers. One guy said something like, "This is all fake. I need proof." He didn't even get to finish the word proof when the lights in the entire house went out. If that was just a coincidence, it's one of the oddest ones I've ever seen. No one else was in the house, and the fuse box was hidden away in the back of a closet. My friend had to call his dad to come home and fix it. He said he had never seen that happen before, that the entire circuit was tripped at the same time. This story takes place around 2010 or 2011 when I was in high school. At this age, I was not the sharpest tool in the shed, with no real discernment or understanding of the spiritual world. At that time, I had a weird obsession with anything occultic or satanic. Just to clarify, I'm now 27 and am a firm believer and follower of Jesus Christ, and realized how insane I was to open a door for something evil to enter my home and my life. I experimented with the crudely home-constructed Ouija board a few times and experienced some weird occurrences. It all started when one afternoon, a few friends and I headed to my house for our almost daily after-school smoking session, which always took place in the detached garage. This is also where we had attempted to contact something with the aforementioned Ouija board. We succeeded, and when asking the entity its name, the planchette moved to spell out Keith. Keith. Keith answered all our questions, explaining he died in the 1990s and that his favorite band was Nirvana. I can't remember anything else that was exchanged. I awoke the next morning to scratch marks on my side, and though they were only superficial, my stomach dropped when I examined it more closely. The scratches were all placed methodically to form a perfect drawing, for lack of a better word, of the Nirvana logo. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, it's a smiley face with X's for eyes and a squiggly mouth with its tongue sticking out. My friends came over to my house again the next day, and we confronted Keith, asking him if he'd been the one to do this. I already knew, but it was confirmed when the planchette moved to yes. Sometime after this, during summer break, I had a group of about 7 people over for a bonfire in the backyard. One of these friends lived in another city and was staying at my house for a week. We'll call her April. It was dark and still. Not even a slight breeze could be felt that night. The friends which had been present for the key sessions and I had been telling the rest what we had experienced, and we all agreed to try the board and see if anything would happen. I can't remember exactly what was said or if the planchette was responding, but what I do remember was asking if whatever I was addressing hated me. Instantly, the planchette moved to yes, and a huge gust of wind started blowing all around me. Just me. It was like a dust devil had formed and enclosed me like a cocoon as dust, leaves, and debris flew violently at me from every direction. I looked at my friends as they were watching this occur, and I swear to you, not one hair on their heads moved. When it stopped, we immediately moved the planchette to goodbye and just kind of sat there in shock for a while. After everyone else had left, April and I headed inside as it was very late. Then I took the most uncomfortable shower of my life. You know how when someone is standing near or enters the room, you can just feel their presence? Well, that feeling hung in the air like a thick cloud, along with the feeling of someone straight up mad dogging me. Now, I'm notorious for taking long showers and using up all the hot water, but I got out of there in what felt like 3 minutes. This next part requires me to elaborate a bit on the layout of the house. Upon entering the front door, there was a family room with a single large window facing the front yard, a couch in front of said window, and a TV. From this room, going right would take you down an L-shaped hallway with my room on the immediate right and the bathroom, my brother's and parents' room down the hall. If you went left, you'd be in the kitchen, which leads to what my dad and I dubbed the music room, since we kept all our instruments and sound equipment in there. It also functioned as a second living room, and it too contained a couch and a TV. Separating this room from the kitchen was a glass door. April and I were sitting at the kitchen table chatting. She was sitting on one side with her back facing the music room, and I sat on the other side, facing her. As she was speaking, I noticed movement behind her. I looked and watched in shock as the glass door, which had been slightly ajar, was slowly opening. I should mention that there were no windows open in the house, nor was there any draft. The air conditioning was not running at the time, and my parents and brother were fast asleep. "April," I said, in a hushed but panicked tone as I pointed to the door. She turned and saw it too, looking back at me for a split second in horror. When the door had completely opened, everything was still and silent for about 3 seconds. Then the door suddenly and forcefully slammed shut. Needless to say, we were freaked out and retreated to my room. After we'd calmed ourselves down, we tried in vain to sleep because we could hear what sounded like scratching coming from inside my closet throughout the night. I have always dealt with insomnia, and I'd often have to sleep in the family room as the TV was the only thing that would make me feel drowsy. I would always put a sleep timer on so the TV wouldn't be on all night after I'd fallen asleep. April had gone home at this point, and I was in a deep sleep on the couch when I abruptly awoke in a cold sweat. The TV was off, so I could see the window behind me and the screen's reflection. There was some light seeping through the curtains from the street light outside, and I could clearly see standing behind me a large black figure whose shoulders touched the ceiling, its head bent down slightly, staring at me. I quickly covered my face with my blanket, seriously hoping this thing didn't know I was awake and aware of its presence. I stayed completely still for what seemed like ages, and I somehow eventually fell back asleep. The following day, I made a call to have the house blessed. Thank God that it worked, and nothing ever happened again. My brother confided in me years later that he used to hear someone calling his name in that house, but whenever he'd ask our parents if they called him, they'd tell him they hadn't. About 2 or 3 years ago, my friends were playing Ouija board at my house. One of them had brought it with them. At first, I just watched while others used it. Then I decided to join in. We asked the board if there was a spirit present, and it said yes. Then we asked the name, but instead of answering, it just pointed to random letters and numbers that made no sense. Annoyed, I asked again, this time more forcefully, and it spelled out B-I-T-C-H. Then the C word, a 4-letter word beginning with C and ending in T. See you next Tuesday. I freaked out and left the room after that. It was either a really mean ghost or something other than a spirit that came through. I'll probably never use a Ouija board again after that. Probably. I used a Ouija board as a kid. I'd always had an interest in the supernatural, so my older sister gave me one for Christmas. When I first started using it, nothing really happened, so I thought maybe it just didn't work. But one day, my best friend came over and we were determined to get that thing to work. We turned up all the lights and put blankets on the windows. I don't know why, but that time, it worked. The planchette started moving slowly around the board. We both thought the other one was pushing it though. So we took turns asking the board questions that the other person wouldn't know the answer to, like my grandma's birthday or my mother's middle name. After getting correct answers to both, we realized that there may be something to this. After that, whenever my best friend came over, we'd get out the Ouija board and ask questions like, how many guys have crushes on us? Just stupid, meaningless things. It seemed to go much faster and get more accurate every time we used it. There also seemed to be different entities speaking to us at different times. It seemed to go much faster and get more accurate every time we used it. There also seemed to be different entities speaking to us at different times. There was a difficult one that refused to spell out anything in the English language. There was a friendly one who talked to us easily. And then there was a spirit that called himself Brandon. I never learned the specifics on who or what he was or how he came to be there, but he was the one that came through the most often. Once I had the guts to ask him how he died. The response was, never alive. Okay. I had certain friends that he didn't like, and he would spell out curse words directed towards them when they played the Ouija board with me. On at least 2 occasions, the friends that he didn't like ended up being backstabbers later on. I guess playing so often and having him in the back of my mind warning me about bad friends gave me a false sense of security that this was all harmless. So fast forward to my high school years. I was having a sleepover at my house with one of the friends that Brandon didn't like, Deanna. We woke up kind of early the next morning to find the house empty. Neither my mom or my brother was around. Now this wasn't a totally weird thing because my brother was often gone, and my mom always had errands to run. It was a pretty windy day, so when we woke up, the power was out and the phone was dead. This was before cell phones, so we had no way of contacting my mother to see where she was or ask what was going on. The only thing working was the battery-operated clock. We decided to play with the Ouija board since there was nothing else to do with the electricity off. We asked maybe 5 to 10 questions like, why is the power off? Answer, the weather. Where did my mom go? Answer, the store. What time will she be back? Now this response was oddly specific. It spelled out 2, 3, 4. Then Deanna asked a question about herself, and the board went to the B, the I, the T, the C, and then to the H. I stuck up for my friend, and I told Brandon that we weren't going to play anymore if he was going to start bad again, so I put the board away. As soon as I put it away, the back door swung open, but nobody walked in. I thought my mom was back, so I told Deanna that we should go help her bring in the groceries. I happened to glance over at the clock, and the exact time was 2:34 p.m. This was weird, but cool. I told Deanna, "Look, it's the exact time the board said." We both kind of smiled and went outside. But when we got out there, we realized there was no car. In fact, there was nobody out there at all. I thought maybe the wind blew the door open, so I closed it and locked the deadbolt. About 5 minutes later, the back door swung open again. Now it was starting to make me feel a little bit creeped out, but I convinced myself that I must not have closed the door all the way or fully turned the lock. So I had Deanna come back there with me to watch me shut and lock the door to make sure I did it right this time. But less than 30 seconds later, it happened again. Now I was scared. There was also a screen door, and both the back door and the screen door were swinging back and forth violently. Then the wind started blowing the papers around that were on the kitchen counter. It was like a scene straight out of The Exorcist. We looked at one another, then ran into the next room to hide under a blanket. It was chaotic and scary, and it seemed to last forever. My family is not very religious, but I've always believed in God, so I started praying the Our Father out loud. After maybe 3 or 4 times of saying it, the wind stopped, the door shut, and it stayed shut this time. Deanna and I didn't speak or move for a good 2 or 3 minutes. And when we finally did start to move, we tried to find a way to contact my mom and get her home. That's the scariest thing that ever happened to me, and there's no real explanation for any of it. I found out later that my mom was never at the store. She took on an extra shift at work, and my brother was at his friend's house. I really do believe that there is an entity in that house to this very day. It always felt creepy in there after that. The 2 biggest things that led me to believe that this really was paranormal are that I locked the door twice with the deadbolt, yet it kept opening, and the fact that something happened at precisely 2:34 p.m. as predicted. My mom didn't come home, but something did. I was staying at a hotel with some friends in Ontario for a chess tournament. Yeah, geeky. I know. One night, somebody took out a Ouija board and we all decided to play. We asked a few questions that I can't remember the answers to, but I'll never forget the answer to one particular question. We asked if any of us was going to die soon. I know, strange thing to ask, but it spelled out my friend's name and gave a date that was 12 months in the future. And a year later, my friend did die of cancer, and he only found out about the diagnosis 6 months before he died. So none of us could have known that at the time we were playing with the Ouija board. To this day, I'm still curious about Ouija boards and how it knew that my friend was going to die, but I'm for sure never touching one of them again. Just to state a fact, this is true. I am lying about nothing in this story. I am a 16-year-old girl who lives with my father in a small townhouse. This is my dad's new house. New as in we've only lived here for half a year. Anyway, I firmly believe that this house is occupied by the ghost of a young boy and that he lives in my stepmother's walk-in closet. I cannot for the life of me figure out why. It kind of just popped up like, oh, I think there's a little boy in the closet. Huh? Exactly like that. There was nothing scary to tell me that there was in fact a little boy in that closet. It was sort of just a feeling that I got. I am a weird child, so I have not 1, not 2, but 3 Ouija boards. I recently found out that I am the 3rd. So for some stupid reason, I had the brightest, best idea in the history of ideas to use both of my boards and my 3rd eye at the same time. Basically, I was using 3 Ouija boards all at once. I'm pretty sure I'm not sane. So I proceeded with my intelligent idea only to have nothing happen. Okay, time to put away my boards. My boards fit in the same box, so on goes the lid. As the lid slid into position, I felt 2 words drift into my head. Hello and Toby. I say felt because I never actually heard anything. My boards never spoke to me and I never felt a presence. So since I am the 3rd board, I think that the little boy just told me that his name was Toby. I went to bed around 10 that night, not thinking at all about anything other than what teenage girls normally think about. I don't know when exactly I fell asleep, but when I woke up, I was sitting up in bed with my knees tucked up to my chest and my phone in my hand. As I mentioned before, I am a very intelligent person, so being the dummy I am, I decided that I was going to turn my phone screen and look at my notifications. As soon as I pressed that button, my room lit up because the brightness was up to the max. Well, I glanced over to my door and really wished I had something to shoot myself with. There was a blanket. A fuzzy blue and purple blanket from the couch in my living room, which, by the way, is on the other side of the house, floating in the air in front of my bedroom door. You know when a kid puts a sheet over their heads and runs around saying boo? Yeah, well, that's what I saw. The cliche spooky ghost, except there was no kid saying boo and them laughing and running away. He just stood there. You could tell that there was something under the blanket because I could seriously see their little toes. I stared at him for 15 whole seconds because that's how long it takes for my phone screen to shut off automatically. When it did, this kid took one massive step towards my bed, so naturally I shut my eyes and threw the covers over my head. And then I woke up again. It was daylight now and my room was empty. Okay, it was just a dream. I smile, give a little laugh, and reach up to take my sleeping mask off. And it's not there. I always sleep with the sleeping mask on. So I'm looking around, and there it is, on the floor, in front of my bedroom door, on the other side of the room. Update. Okay, so I figured out that Toby likes to turn my Xbox on and off. He turned on my lamp too, but that was only once. I like to keep my parents' bedroom door closed when they're not home because my dad has blackout curtains on the windows. I don't really like going into their room either because Toby has closed the door behind me on multiple occasions. One night at college, we were all hanging out at a friend's dorm room and we decided to play the Ouija board. There were a few of them that had never used it before and were quite skeptical. It was around 11 p.m. and communication with the board was going rather well. Gary, one of the skeptics, kept making fun of the whole thing, but we convinced him to sit down on the floor with us and give it a try. The first question he asked was, "Is this all a bunch of bull?" The planchette moved over to no, so Gary said, "Fine, prove it's real." The moment he said that, the lights in the room began to flicker and the fire alarm went off. This freaked us all out. We had to vacate the building to follow fire alarm procedures. After about 20 minutes, the campus security said it was a false alarm and let us all back inside the dorm. When we got back to our friend's room, the Ouija board was gone. None of us took it with us and the door had been locked. We never saw that Ouija board again. There's a bit of backstory, but it is important. In February of 2015, my sister ended up buying a Ouija board. She bought it from Spencer's Gifts, so it was cheap and plastic. It has a moon and a sun in the top two corners and two images on the bottom that I don't really remember. She made plans with two of her friends, S and D, and myself to use the board. We all spent the night at S's house. They wanted to wait to take out the board until 12 a.m., the witching hour, to have a higher chance of making contact with something. We had a dance party and ate a ton of junk food, and about 10:30 p.m. we settled down to watch a movie. I fell asleep. At about 11:45 p.m., S stopped the movie and we started setting up. I was tired from our craziness. We shut off the lights, lit white candles, and got around the board. My sister, S, and I had our hands on the planchette while D sat next to us with paper and a pencil to document. She was too scared to use the board. We opened the board and asked questions without much luck. We stopped and talked about what we could do to help things along. After a while, my sister looked up an app on her phone that took words that ghosts were saying, or something like that. S thought it was stupid, but we were going to try anything. The phone was handed off to D to keep an eye on. We kept talking about the candles being too bright or someone not being open enough to it when D said that the phone just said plastic and board, one after the other. We took that as a sign that something may be happening. The moment I put my fingers on the planchette, I started shaking. Dread washed over me so intensely, but I could not let go of the planchette. I didn't want to. It took all I had to keep myself from crying. The board started off silent, but all of a sudden it moved to Z, then Y, then X. My sister instantly got scared and said, "Move it to goodbye, now, hurry!" We did, and the feeling was gone as quickly as it came. My sister explained that if whatever is moving the planchette starts counting down, moving up or down the alphabet, making figure eights, or moving to the four corners is a bad spirit or demon and is trying to make the board a portal. We stopped for the night after that. I didn't tell them how I felt. I was worried that they would think I was just messing with them and they wouldn't believe me. I had trouble sleeping because I thought it would come back as I slept. I had never experienced dread quite like that before. It felt violating. It felt like whatever it was tried to possess my body. I feel that because I was so tired, I was vulnerable to attack. I would never play with the board again. It is not a game. It's so real and can go very wrong. When my brother and I were very little, my mom took out a Ouija board one day and asked if we wanted to play. We were just asking stupid questions until my mom said, "Let's get serious and really try to contact someone." Now here is where it gets a little weird. Mom's friend George had recently gone missing. He'd been gone for about a month and nobody knew where he was. When we asked the name of the spirit we were talking to, the board spelled out George's name. We then asked if it was the same George that went missing. The pointer went over to yes. My mom became visibly upset and she asked him where he was. It spelled out in a lake. At that point, we stopped because we were all getting very upset. Mom tried to make a joke of it for our sake, but she was visibly shaken. About 2 weeks later, they found his body. He'd fallen up a bridge into the lake below and drowned. It was kind of hidden away, so they didn't find his body until then. My worst experiences with the Ouija board are pertaining to Oz. I know it's considered to be BS by many, but it isn't. In 1992, my friend got a Ouija board for Christmas. We were both 8 years old. I had never played with one before, so we sat down with the board between us when something that we thought was called Oz came through. At first, it was fine. We were just asking dumb questions like, will my mom let us stay up late tonight? But then it turned dark. It said it was going to do terrible things to us. Things that I won't mention here because they're that dark. And then it said it wanted to kill us both. It really freaked us out, so we stopped playing and said goodbye. This was 1992, and we were naive children. There was no internet back then, and our town had no libraries that carried books on the occult, so we had no way of looking up any information, but the name Oz always stuck with us. I went on assuming that my friend was the one pushing the planchette, despite the fact that the things that were said were very out of character for her. She was just a normal 8-year-old girl. How could she know to say such awful things? Fast forward to 2004, I was once again playing with the Ouija board, this time with my husband's friend and his wife. The first person to come through was the friend's mother. He thought it was all BS, so we decided to test the board with a question that nobody in the room knew about him. He said, "If you're really my mom, what was your favorite drink?" The planchette spelled out grape soda. His mother had passed away when he was just 10 years old, so none of us knew her, let alone her favorite drink. So he was convinced enough to carry on a rather lengthy conversation. He got pretty emotional. It was actually kind of sweet. But then the board turned dark. It started spelling out words like afraid. And it got really creepy, saying it was going to kill his wife. Then Oz was spelled out, and the planchette started moving around radically on its own. We got scared and said goodbye. I never did any research about Oz, and I'm pretty sure they didn't know about it either. A year later, I found out that Oz was actually a real name and that this was something that a lot of people encounter using a Ouija board. So unbeknownst to me, I had twice been contacted by a demon. My girlfriend told me about her experience with the Ouija board back in high school in 1986. Her friend Johnny had cystic fibrosis and was in the hospital. She and her friend Shelly would go to visit him a few times a week to keep his spirits up. One night after a visit, they went back to Shelly's and decided to play with the Ouija board. A spirit came through that seemed to know a lot about them that it really shouldn't have known. So after asking some banal questions about boys and other things that teenage girls ask, my girlfriend decided to ask about Johnny and his condition. The board spelled out 2/4 June 1987. Johnny, worry no more. Then the planchette went to say goodbye. My girlfriend and Shelly were so convinced that the board was telling them the date that he was going to recover that they actually wrote it down, put it in a sealed envelope, and were planning on giving it to him the following year to celebrate. Well, the next year on June 24th, it turned out that indeed, Johnny did not need to worry any longer about his condition, because it was the day that he died. Not long after my ex-boyfriend lost his friend in a plane crash, we tried to contact her with the Ouija board. Something claiming to be his friend came through, saying that she was scared and alone and desperate for communication. But I just knew this thing was not his friend, so I insisted that we stop immediately because I could feel a dark presence in the corner of the room. As soon as I said the word stop, the planchette started moving on its own, going all over the board so fast. It couldn't even spell anything. It was absolutely terrifying. I put the board away in my room and refused to use it again that night. I felt exhausted after that, completely drained, and I had to lie down for a nap. A half hour later, I woke up, and in my mind's eye, I saw that same dark presence standing in the corner of the room. As soon as I saw it, it rushed towards me. I opened my mouth and yelled for my boyfriend to get it off of me. I could actually feel it aggressively trying to possess me. I ran from the house screaming and shaking horribly, vowing never to use a Ouija board again. But the point became moot because one day it just disappeared out of my room, completely vanished. I never saw it again, and to this day I have no idea what happened to it.